Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this virtual meeting. My name is Rose Washuka, Policy Advisor to the Cabinet Secretary. Allow me to invite Dr. Walter Ongeti to set the stage for the meeting. I would just like to request, when you're not making an intervention, kindly keep your microphones on mute. So that we are able to understand each other. Thank you very much and welcome. Dr. Ongeti?
Thank you so much, Rose, for that invitation. Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Dr. Amina Mohammed, Chief Administrative Secretary, Honorable Hassan Nur Hassan, PS, Mr. Joe Okudo, various presidents of sports federations, various stakeholders present, members of the Fourth Estate, Senior Ministry of Sports and other ministry officials present. Welcome to this session of presenting the resumption of sport protocols to the stakeholders that will be undertaken by the Cabinet Secretary for Sports in a moment. This is a moment which is critical in the stage given the COVID-19 pandemic development, and therefore we will not go into much details at this particular point in time. I want to invite PS Sports, Mr. Joe Okudo, to make his remarks and move on with the program from here. PS Joe Okudo.
The Cabinet Secretary, the Ministry of Sports, Dr. Ambassador Amina Mohammed, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Hassan Nur Hassan, senior colleagues from the Ministry of Sports, senior representatives from Government of Kenya, leadership of all sports federations, invited guests, distinguished athletes, members of the Fourth Estates, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great honor and humility to be able to address you this very cold morning, I must say, on the protocols, the work that the committee set up by the Cabinet Secretary on the protocols of the resumption of sports. In March this year, we all aware that COVID came to our shores, and as a result, the enforcement of stopping of sporting activities, amongst others in the country, in a way as to manage this pandemic. As a ministry, guided by our Cabinet Secretary, we did initiate a stimulus relief program, both food and cash, for vulnerable athletes as a way of cushioning them against the effects of this pandemic, because many of our athletes, sportsmen and women, did lose huge amounts of income by not being able to participate. Parallel to this initiative, our Cabinet Secretary set up the advisory committee chaired by our Chief Administrative Secretary. Recommendations of this advisory committee that we are soon going to be discussing today, this morning, is paramount and key for us in guiding us on how to open up our sporting activities. We are aware that the numbers of the pandemic have been increasing, and we are therefore cautioned that we should actually, as we walk into the stage of opening our sporting activities, move with a lot of caution, because the safety and lives of both our sportsmen and women is paramount and key to us. It is also our wish in the ministry to see the resumption of our world international sporting activities, like the World Under-20 that was postponed to next year, the Olympics, the World Rally Championship, and so on and so forth. We're also looking forward to hosting the Continental Tour in October this year, in the assumption that we will be able to get protocols in place that will help us resume our sporting activities in Kenya. With these few remarks, I would also like to mention that the Cabinet Secretary, who is here with us today, will be leaving shortly in about an hour for another meeting. As he now absents, the Chief Administrative Secretary, who was the chair of this committee, will manage this stakeholders engagement. So I therefore ask the Chief Administrative Secretary to come and give his opening remarks and invite the Cabinet Secretary to address you distinguished guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. PS, I'm still trying to sort out the technical glitches. So the Chief Administrative Secretary is not in the meeting. So PS, kindly invite the CS to deliver her remarks.
Without further ado, allow me to invite our Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Ambassador Amina Mohammed, to address the distinguished stakeholders and to give set the stage for this engagement this morning. Welcome, Madam Waziri. Rose, you might have to unmute the CS. Hello?
Yes, right away.
Rose, are we there?
Yes, yes, Waziri, we are on.
Yes, good morning. Yes, and thank you very much for this stakeholder forum. Let me begin by acknowledging the presence, and I hope he's joined us already, of Hassan Nur Hassan, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, and the Chairperson of the Advisory Committee of Sports Activities. Mr. Joe Kudo, Principal Secretary, State Department of Sports, officials present, senior county government officials, presidents and other representatives of sports federations, invited guests, distinguished athletes, most members of the fourth estate, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm pleased to engage with you all through this virtual platform to unveil guidelines and protocols for safe resumption of sporting activities across our country. The COVID-19 pandemic has adversely affected and destabilized our sporting lives, and in the process caused unprecedented social, economic, and psychological losses to our athletes, to our sports enthusiasts, to our sports organizations, and to all other stakeholders. COVID-19 brought the whole sporting world to a standstill, with various major competitions either put on hold or cancelled altogether. The world's greatest sporting event, the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo, initially scheduled for July and August 2020, were postponed to the year 2021. In Kenya, the situation and considerations of safety above all else compelled us to postpone major global and continental sports events. The WRC Safari Rally, the World Athletics Under-20 Championship, the Continental Tour, the Rugby Bathurst Cup, and the magical Kenya Open Golf Championship. The grinding to a halt of all sporting events, though painful, was for a good reason: to ensure the safety and the security of all players in the sector and in the country at large. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I wish to thank all the athletes and sports organizations for complying with the Ministry of Health guidelines. I also wish to thank some of our partners, sports organizations, well-wishers, and humanitarian institutions who have supported our athletes by donating food rations and stimulus packages during this period. I most sincerely thank His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta for providing a stimulus package through Sports, Arts and Social Development Fund that has cushioned our 2,500 national team athletes for the last 3 months. On June 30th, ladies and gentlemen, I appointed the Resumption of Sports Advisory Committee to draw up protocols for the resumption of sporting activities in our country following the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee drew its membership from the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, the Ministry of Health, sports health practitioners, sports stakeholders, and other eminent professionals in the sports industry. The key brief for the advisory committee was to engage stakeholders, analyze the COVID-19 situation in the country, learn from other jurisdictions, and offer advice on the best way forward as Kenyan sports prepares to resume. The advisory committee, under the chairmanship of the Chief Administrative Secretary of the Ministry, Honorable Hassan Nur Hassan, commenced its work immediately. It engaged stakeholders, undertook an environmental outlook, and eventually proposed the guidelines. I would like to thank the advisory committee for the hard work to ensure these guidelines are complete and comprehensive. I would also like to thank the Ministry of Health officials who guided the advisory committee's engagements. The guidelines are now ready to be shared with stakeholders across the country for feedback. I'm aware that stakeholders have waited eagerly for the release of these guidelines by our ministry. Due to the nature of the pandemic, it was imperative to take a delicate, diligent process to satisfy Ministry of Health and World Health Organization directives on the same, including on public participation. The advisory committee will therefore make a comprehensive presentation, after which we will open a window of 7 days for stakeholder engagement and feedback. The guidelines will also be available on the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage website. They will also be shared officially with all sports organizations. In view of this, I invite all of you to review the STEM and share your feedback via email at cabinetsecretarysports@gmail.com. I hope that we'll be able to complete this exercise as quickly as possible and roll out then a sports calendar. I want to thank you very much for your attention. May God bless you, bless our country, and I'll hand over to the Principal Secretary to continue with this meeting. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam CS, for those encouraging words. I believe the agenda has been set for us. What we now need to do is Dr. Walter Ngeti and the Commission of Sport, I believe, have planned to do a small presentation, I believe a summary of the protocols. Thereafter, we'll take a bit of remarks and then circulate the documents as the CS has directed to all our stakeholders, and then wait for the feedback you we can share with our colleagues from the Ministry of Health, and hopefully thereafter we'll be able to come up with a roadmap on how activities. I hope that this does not take 6 to 7 days working. So over to you, Dr. Ngeti. Dr. Ngeti?
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Waziri, for those remarks and setting the stage for the presentation. We will now want to present the guidelines as the CS has already directed. The draft guidelines will be uploaded on the website, ministry website, and all the other stakeholders will be shared with the guidelines. What I would wish to do at this point in time is to make a presentation of the guidelines, and thereafter we can receive the comments from the stakeholders present here.
Thank you,
So-
Dr. Just if you may allow me to just thank the Cabinet Secretary very much. She has to attend to a short engagement, so she will be leaving us shortly, and then later on she will rejoin the meeting for discussions. Waziri, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we look forward to having you back after the urgent engagement that is at 9 o'clock. Thank you, Waziri. Walter?
Thank you so much, Rose. And now I'll take the stakeholders through the presentation of the guidelines. Members, the guidelines are broadly categorized in general guidelines, and most of these guidelines are actually drawn from the Ministry of Health guidelines. We also received feedback and input from all the stakeholders, including sports federations, and that's what we have now put together. And therefore, the general guidelines, which you will find in section 1.3, largely cater for the broad issues that have been presented. So what I'm currently screening are the overview remarks and acknowledgement by the CS, the CAS and PS, then definition of terms, as they will be found in different documents and also guided by the Ministry of Health, and also as most of us may. Now, the objectives have been put across. I'm not going to draw details of the objectives as they have already been in the speech by the CS. And 1.3 is very, very important because this is planned for modifying and varying engagement, and that we are saying that if these guidelines are, they are infections that occur and there is a larger proportion, then modification will happen. Also, inability to maintain COVID-19 prevention and response protocols, and also inability to track or isolate athletes and athlete support staff and personnel, and changes in public health guidelines regarding congregants, as well as change to local legislation and so forth. What we're simply saying is that these guidelines will be also informed by the Ministry of Health guidelines as we proceed. Then there are preliminary activities which we expect all stakeholders to be able to adhere to, and that is information sharing, as well as education to athletes and athlete-related stakeholders. And we also hope that all sports federations and organizations will domesticate these guidelines in line with those from their specific international sports governing bodies, as well as Ministry of Health, on condition that that domestication is not inconsistent with these guidelines, as well as the Ministry of Health guidelines. Then sports organizations being able to set up committees, as well as disseminate information related to COVID-19, as well as venue operators being able to ensure the safe environment. And you'll find all the other general guidelines, including the fact that we are saying no press conferences, no handshakes and hugs, as well as exchanging of uniforms and sharing of the same. And also, most importantly, number 10, there are any suspected cases of COVID-19 to be processed in line with the guidelines provided by the Ministry of Health. Then there are guidelines for venue preparedness, and this is very, very important in terms of identification and appointment of COVID-19 sports champions and response teams, health checks, testing and screening for athletes, as well as endorsed action plans by organizers, which must align to these and other international guidelines. Then members, I will skip 1.34 for your review later on. And 1.4 is protocols for implementation and enforcement. And this is for managers of indoor facilities. And we are saying there at Roman 1 that to ensure social distancing guidelines are followed, solid partitions can be installed in certain areas, such as receptions, and we've seen this in form of glass partitioning where it is possible, and so forth. Changing rooms accessibility is restricted in order to promote social distancing, as well as access to showers in the changing room will be restricted. Venue guidelines, where venue operators will be expected to ensure that the sporting environment is safe, and we have also provided for various guidelines there that indicate or provide for safety in that environment. Like clear, number 4, there clear designation of entry and exit points, allocation of exclusive drop-off, pickup, and parking areas for athletes, athletes support personnel, officials, and staff, and also all visitors, staff, officials, and athletes support personnel to wear masks, face masks throughout their time at the venue. And of course, number 7 there, which is important for contact tracing, that keeping of a temporary record of clients and visitors for at least 30 days. The rest relates to cleaning and disinfecting of handrails and gates and all other areas, equipment and storage areas and so forth. Members, all these are for venue and as well as disinfection of venues after completion of each sporting activities. As members, we may have mentioned, we are just doing high-level summaries, and we will present this at a later point. 1.42 is about swimming pools and aquatic venues, and this is critical for swimmers that all water sports with high aerosol levels, such as swimming pools, to remain closed, as well as saunas, steam rooms, hot tubs will remain closed. Later on, we will go through the guidelines for swimming, especially in open spaces. As at now, they will remain closed. Then pre-competition guidelines have been provided there for members and the various organizations and organizers of events. During competitions, including any tournaments, matches, leagues, or games, athletes, and all other sports stakeholders will follow the following. They have been listed there, including the fact that there should be designated areas where social distancing must be observed. All but active athletes and event officials will be required to wear masks, and it is recommended that athletes be allowed to take health breaks to allow personal hydration. And obviously, the media centers, tribunes, and staff, that the media staff will wear face masks while working, and non-essential staff will not be allowed in events. There are also post-competition guidelines, which we have listed there, including transportation of athletes to be carried out as guided by the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure. And collection and proper disposal of waste is very, very important. And keep post-event meetings at a minimum. 1.53 is for the persons living with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. Those are athletes and athlete personnel, as well as other stakeholders in that space. And there are guidelines there, including dedicated sanitation measures and care of sport and locomotion equipment, special attention for the persons with disability handlers and guides, as well as enhanced accessibility to public areas. 1.4 is guidelines for indoor facilities. This includes gyms and other indoor related facilities, and these are supposed to be disinfected and aired out after a session, that is the activities, as well as frequently touched surfaces must be disinfected after use at various times in a day. And there should be sufficient, proper and sufficient ventilation with air not being blown directly to people and that means air conditioning systems and so forth. Now, 1.55 brings us to the resumption to training. There are three phases that you can see there, stakeholders, and what these, I'll skip this so that we move to 1.6, which will also speak to 1.55. And here there is categorization of sports and recreational activities. And the appendix 1, which we will go to later on, and members will be able to also have an interaction with them, is a help in the different steps that are indicated there. So there are steps of red to amber, and then again amber 2, then yellow, then the various greens up to the very last green. The green, the final green, is when we will have resumed to normalcy, and perhaps we are saying that at that particular point, we will no longer have a situation where COVID-19 is prevalent. But to begin as of, we have these 6 steps. We'll start with amber, and all of them are again in 6 phases, and we shall go through them now systematically. Now, step 1 for outdoor recreation, and these will be in the category of hiking, mountain climbing, and so forth. Step 1 will be health tests, physical conditioning, and psychosocial training. And then we go to the next. This is what was amber 2 there: jogging, walking, cycling, hiking permitted, as well as groups of a maximum of 6, no with restrictions and restricted access to ablution facilities. Members, allow me to take you back a bit, because this is very, very important. That movement from one to the other will be authorized by the Cabinet Secretary. That is moving from one step to another upon satisfactory monitoring and evaluation outputs, and informed by overall guidelines provided from time to time by the Ministry of Health. At the commencement of all of these protocols, all sports organizations and sporting men and women and our athletes will begin to undertake step 1 activities. So once this is clear, then we'll be able to move, graduate as the situation unfolds, and as monitoring and evaluation solutions are advised. So that would be important. I thought that would be important to mention. So then the different categories of the different games and activities are the way to step 6. Mentioned I would see.
Najua ni nini naulizwa, kwa nini tumenyonga hiyo kitu
ile
acha kana deal nayo.
The meeting has reached a maximum of 10. Please try again later. Wamenitoa kwa meeting. Wamenitoa kwa meeting, I think. Can.
I got it.
Ken, wamenitoa kwa meeting. I think kuna watu wao wenye hawakuwa wameingia, wakaangalia mimi user, I think hawakuwa wananijua, wakanitoa.